Today, on The Doctors Who Read Stuff, we are covering Dune, a novel by Frank Herbert. But before we get into the details, we are going to be diving into Frank Herbert himself. Not literally, because that's gross. But we're going to talk about his life, his writing process, and what's going on with the Dune property. All that and more coming up next.
That was good.
Yeah,
Nice.
Thank you. So, like we said, we're covering Dune. We didn't really make an announcement, but I think everybody's figured it out by now.
Surprise!
Dune it is.
Dune it is. All right.
And this is one of my top 5 books of all time. So it's one of my favorites, and I'm excited.
And you read quite a bit, so that is indeed high praise.
Yeah, and I read a lot of genres. So even across genres, this is in my top 5.
Wow.
Because I think this one kind of transcends a lot. So they call it sci-fi. It's really soft sci-fi. It's not highly technological, or there's not a lot of techno jargon, which I think Herbert purposefully did. But it really focuses a lot on politics, religion, economies, it's government,
ecology,
it's war. It's a lot of everything, and it was way ahead of its time.
Definitely.
Published in 1965. And I thought it was interesting. I read that it started as a serialized, I think, contribution to Analog magazine way back in the 60s. But when Herbert was trying to get it published, it was declined by 23 publishers, and it was finally picked up by Chilton. So if you're familiar with the Chilton automotive manuals, that's the Chilton that ended up publishing Dune, which I just found astounding that of all the publishers to say, oh, yep, that's what we're going after, they took the risk. And now it said that I think the first edition sold for like $5 or $6, and I think a first edition now is worth about 10 grand.
Wow.
So it was kind of interesting to me. You mentioned being turned down by something like 23 publishers. I think one of them was quoted as stating, "I might be making the mistake of the decade, but..." and then they passed on it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so it came out, and it wasn't a hit right away, but it did win a Hugo Award. It tied for the Hugo Award, and it won the inaugural Nebula Award, I think in '66. And I think I read somewhere that they cited it as in 2003-ish that it was considered the best-selling science fiction novel of all time.
So
yeah, and it's had influences in popular culture. So I know we'll probably touch on movies, and one of my favorite bands did a song based on it. But I read that a lot of the moon, or one of the moon Titan on Saturn, a lot of the features in the moon are named after planets from Dune. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Kind of cool stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, it's. I think looking at my notes, it was the Nebula Award in '65, and then a shared Hugo Award in '66.
That was okay.
And just to illustrate that this wasn't an immediate success, by 1968, so 3 years after it was published, he had only made around $20,000 from the book. So,
which I thought, as a working writer at the time, that wasn't bad money for a writer at the time. It just, it hadn't reached those kind of astronomical readership that it eventually got to.
Yes, and I believe from what I was reading, he was only able to become a writer full-time in, like, I want to say 73, but I don't know if that's right.
It was like, I thought it was almost 10 years after it came out. And I think and I can't remember if he'd published 2 more or 3 more books at that point.
Yeah.
Because he's, I guess I don't know how old he was. Was he born in like 20? 1920?
Yep.
So he was middle-aged or close to middle-age, mid-40s when that was initially published. So he kind of found some success later in his career as an author. I know he did a lot of writing and stuff for different publications through his career, but not as a fiction writer.
Yeah, so here is our photo of Frank, I made the comment before we started recording that I prefer bearded Frank to non-bearded Frank. So this was the photo that we kind of
Yeah.
went with.
I like the Izod shirt too. I mean, it was
Yeah,
just with the big collar.
that is a huge color.
That is a big color,
Yeah.
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 And so, really, like, this book is immense in that it tries to tackle so many different things. I mean, we mentioned earlier ecology, economy, politics, like it
Religion,
religion,
philosophy.
yeah. So I mean, it hits all these different things and it does it really well. So
It,
Chip, obviously you said it's your top 5.
mhm.
I have read it several times as well, and it's definitely up there for me. Brian, this is your first time through, right?
It is. I feel like I'm a newbie on a lot of these books, but it's maybe in my top 5 books that I've known about but never got the chance to read. So it's also in
I've
my
got
top 5 list.
I've got some of those too. So I've got
So here's what I'm excited about with the dynamic, having, somebody that hasn't versus having two of us that have, is that we kind of have that, almost like that lens of nostalgia that Brian won't have. So you'll see if we're remembering things through rose-colored glasses or if we're actually tracking.
yeah.
Well, I'm gonna call you guys out on stuff. It'll
I think it'll
actually,
be. Go ahead, Brian.
it'll be kind of an educational experience for all of us. I think it's going to be every time you can read through a book, you can usually pick up on little
Oh, yeah.
details, nuances that you didn't pick up on prior read-throughs.
So one thing I've noticed, because I have reread Wheel of Time multiple times, and every time I read that,
I've only read through that one once.
okay,
But
that used to be an annual read for me before I had kids.
that's a slog then, and it's thousands and thousands of pages. But
Yeah.
that's impressive.
Well, thank you. But every
But
time I would read it, I would pick out something. I was like, wait a minute. Has this been here the whole time? So I'm sure that's going to happen here because I don't know that I have read this in probably 5 or 6 years now.
it's probably been close to 15 for me. Whenever the last, I think, sci-fi had the miniseries that came out in 2000, and I read it sometime after that. But well, the kids were younger. But talk about when you mentioned Wheel of Time. I was thinking about just the influences that Dune as a book has had on other authors, and you can't deny that the Aes Sedai and the Bene Gesserit have a lot of similarities. So it's kind of fun to think about
Yeah.
that too, as far as the different features in Dune and how those tendrils are out there. I also read that Herbert was the one who helped, I guess, being from the Pacific Northwest, he helped launch Terry Brooks' career. That he did some review of The Sword of Shannara when Brooks wrote that, and really helped kind of propel him into a career in writing. I don't know if he offered him advice or worked with him at all, but I guess that at some point their paths crossed, and he helped Brooks kind of either promote or even get the book written, or get the book published. But
Wow. That's pretty cool.
so
And I
yeah, but
remember, I believe it was during Mistborn, I think more than once I might have drawn some parallels back to Dune or back to Herbert's style or
yeah,
something too. So
hmm yeah, and I thought that when we read that one as well, that it just the visuals, the kind of real barren landscapes, and I was thinking even too, I can't remember some of the characters in it in Mistborn. Who were the guys with the nails in their eyes? I don't know why I kept thinking now of like the Sardaukar, the elite shock troopers, that go around and just, yeah. Anyway,
so let's talk about other mediums that Dune has been adapted to. You mentioned the miniseries that Sci-Fi did in 2000. There's also the very divisive David Lynch movie from, I believe, 1985.
That was my first exposure to the Dune. So I saw the movie before I read the book, and then I read the book after I saw the movie because I enjoyed the movie, but I didn't know, I didn't know anything going in. So it was a cool visual movie. I thought the characters were neat, the settings were neat, and it made me want to read the book. But I also read that it was, at the time, I think Lynch took his name off as director and there's a name that it's not coming to me right now that directors will use if they want to disown a movie. All directors will use the same name. It's Alan Smithy is what they use. I don't know why, but I think he originally pulled his name from it. He didn't want anything to do with it. And even recently I saw, and I think it's probably because of the new Dune movie coming out later this year, hopefully, that Lynch said that is the one thing that he regrets in his career was letting kind of the big budgets and big producing entities kind of control that movie. He lost control of it basically and had a horrible experience and can't stand it.
I think that's fair. But and then you mentioned the movie coming out supposedly in, I believe, November, December. Part 1 is out, right?
I think it's supposed to be December, and it hasn't been pushed yet. So I'm hoping that we'll actually get movies back in the theaters sometime. Hopefully by December.
And
there was also
sorry.
I was going to say there was also an attempt originally to make a movie in the 70s. I want to say it was around 75, between 75 and 80, that there was a big push by, I think it was Alexander Jodorowsky, Alexandro Jodorowsky, and he had these grand visions. There's a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, and it talks about kind of all the pre-production they went through, and they got to the point where I think they started filming some scenes, but he was going to have Salvador Dali was going to play the Padishah Emperor. Pink Floyd was going to do the soundtrack. I mean, it looked very, very trippy, very 70s type feel to it, but for some reason that got shelved and it got picked up in 85 or whenever Lynch picked it up in the early 80s and started making it into his movie that he didn't like. But yeah, didn't Sci-Fi do 2 miniseries? Did they do The Children of Dune too?
Yes, they did. Yep. And I think I have the DVDs somewhere of both of them. So maybe I should pop them in and watch them sometime.
Yeah.
But
I mentioned there was a song, one of my favorite bands is Iron Maiden, and they did a song called To Tame a Land, which is basically influenced by Dune. They originally wanted to call it Dune, and they wrote Herbert asking permission to use the name. And I think he wrote back basically something that he didn't like heavy metal music. He never heard of Iron Maiden, but didn't like them because he didn't like that kind of music, and basically told them, hell no. So they changed the name, but they kind of kept the lyrics the same. So I thought that was kind of funny.
So the movie coming out here later in 2020 is kind of star-studded.
Ooh, yeah.
They released some promotional images a while back, and I thought it'd be fun to kind of walk through those. So here we have Mary Jane from the new Spider-Man films. Yeah.
Zendaya.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
We also...
She looks really pretty as a Fremen. Spider-Man movie. Because she's going to play Chani, right?
Yes, I believe so. Yep. Jason Momoa, who I believe is playing Duncan Idaho, if I remember correctly.
Is he Duncan?
I thought so.
That sounds right. Who's we'll get to him. So I'm sorry, never mind.
Next up, we have Josh Brolin. Everybody knows him as Thanos.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall offhand what part he is playing.
So I thought he was Duncan. Oh, is he going to be Gurney Halleck?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
So he's the troubadour warrior. So that was Patrick Stewart's character, right?
I think so, yeah.
Was Gurney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's check out Patrick, since you brought him up.
With the, I think Brian coined it the skullet earlier.
Yep.
Yeah, it's oh man, it's special.
Well, and this is a still from David Lynch's movie, so you can kind of see the still suits that they're wearing here, the suits that allow them to survive in the Arrakeen deserts. And then if we come up again to the shot of Chani, however you pronounce that, you can see the modern take on the still suit. So it's interesting. I think there are enough similar visual elements that you can connect the dots, but there's also, I think, quite a few exciting upgrades. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. And then the last one is Oscar Isaac, who played Poe Dameron in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, rocking an awesome beard. And I'm not sure who he is.
He's Duke Leto.
Oh,
yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And then the lady Jessica's played, I can't remember the actress's name, but she's been in the Mission Impossible movies and some other stuff. So
this is one heck of a cast.
Yeah.
It's stacked. And then Paul is played by, is it Timothy
Chalamet?
Chalamet is
I think it's Chalamet. I think. But
unsophisticated.
I wasn't going to say anything. Brian, you weren't either, were you?
Oh, no, I would never do that.
So starting next week, we're actually going to dive into the book, and we're going to get into... And this is where it gets difficult. I was going to say the first couple chapters, but Frank Herbert did not break the book into chapters.
I mean, there's breaks in the book, but there's no chapter numbers, so...
There's no delineation, so we're still trying to figure out how we're going to display to all of you in the video description how far we're getting. So hopefully we'll have that figured out by the time we do this again. And I'm sure by now you've noticed we've got some upgraded graphics and visuals, and next episode we will have some more information on the very talented artist that put these together for us, and where you might be able to go to find his work.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So thank you for tuning in. If you are excited about where this is going, if you're a fan of Dune, if you're a fan of the upcoming movie, if you just want a good sci-fi book in your life, I suggest you click the like button and the subscribe button and keep tuning in, because we're coming back at you every week with new content.
Dune.
Nice.
Dune. Okay.
Until next time.
Please don't. Please stop.
Alonzi.